So, hey everyone, and welcome to the MAME podcast, the series where I interview interesting professors, engineers, and people I want to talk to. My name is Philip, and I'm the VP Events of the McGill Association of Mechanical Engineers. And today's guest is a professor at McGill that is extremely interesting. I've had him in one of my classes, and may I introduce Professor Andrew Churchill.
Hi, how's everybody doing today? Give a shout out to the, we'll give a Zoom shout out to the world that we don't know if you're there.
So Professor, I'll let you introduce yourself.
My name's Andrew, and I started teaching CCOM 206. I am either proud or am embarrassed to say, I shouldn't be embarrassed to say, I'm teaching CCOM, I think since 2008, maybe 2009, so 10 years now. Which is pretty interesting. You go through, we can maybe talk about some of this as we move along. But when you work at something for a long time, it changes. So you kind of go through some different stages as you work at something. And certainly my experience teaching the CCOM 206 class has done that. I don't know where you want to go today. So let's, I'll throw the ball back in your court, Philippe, and we can, we'll let you lead.
Yeah, so I thought it would be interesting maybe to discuss communication in engineering. I think it's a really important aspect of definitely in general in life, being able to communicate and present is very important. And in engineering, I think it's a really great tool to maybe get different types of jobs or have access to maybe the job of your dreams. And I think you're the perfect person. I mean, for sure, a lot of people are like, "Wow, this job would be so cool," but it's not mine. I could never. But I
never do that.
Exactly, I can never do that.
You never know until you try.
Exactly, and I think being prepared and maybe being a good communicator is a big aspect of that, especially in engineering.
Yeah, it's I think a really interesting time. The job world is shifting dramatically. You were kind enough to introduce me as a professor. I'm actually not a professor at McGill. I'm a sessional instructor, and I do independent contract work. Which, frankly, when I think about your generation, the people in their 20s who are graduating now, an awful lot of your work over the course of your career, I think, will end up being independent contract work. And you're going to have to build the skills that you're good at and master those skills, and then find places where those skills are valued, and bring those skills to those places. So that's certainly an interesting piece. One of the skills that's I think a critical building block, but not enough in and of itself, is communication, right? So one of the reasons that schools don't spend a lot of time teaching communications is because communications isn't seen as a skill, but it really is. Just like math is a skill, or engineering, or all of the different things that people will study. And the interesting thing is that communication ends up, if you don't you don't need to be a fantastic communicator. Everybody doesn't need to be a fantastic communicator. But if you don't achieve a base level of being able to communicate effectively, then that's going to create a false ceiling on your career, because that's going to be the thing that prevents you from moving on, from moving up, from leveraging. Or not even leveraging. Leveraging is probably not the right word. It's more like from unleashing the skills that you have, right? So the inability the inability to communicate effectively becomes essentially a barrier. And then when we start to think about these next generations of job markets, and places like LinkedIn, where the people and needs are discovered versus being asked for.
Yeah.
So some of what's happening, I can tell you a little bit about my experience. I've been on LinkedIn probably for 5, 6, 7 years, but never active. It was just sitting there passively, kind of collecting, collecting a bit of a network. My network was probably 500 people 6 months ago. And then, I don't know, maybe 2 months ago, so relatively recently, I started being active and posting and kind of thinking about what it is that I do and how to package it into little bits and share it. And what's happened is two things. One, that network's grown, so now, I don't know, they're like 1,100 people or something. But two, people have started asking me about stuff, and I've yet to land a job because of it. I don't have any contracts because of it. But I do have relationships because of it, and I am learning things because of it.
Yeah.
So I'm getting into I have a little micro community now of people that I've come to know there, and I may not even know them very well, but we cross list and cross post and comment on each other's thoughts, and it's been a good space. It's been a space that I've started to actually learn a tremendous amount there, because you start listening to how other people think about things, and people start reacting to how you think about things. And now there is starting to be a little bit of interest. I teach these graduate student workshops, and a couple of people are actually coming to the graduate student workshops not because Teaching and Learning Services broadcasted through the McGill megaphone, but because I posted on LinkedIn that I was doing them, and they were like, "Oh, cool, we didn't even know you were doing that." And I'm like, "How could you not know you're doing that? Like, McGill's been telling you I've been doing this."
Yeah.
But we're all so bombarded with so much information. So that's a little bit of the LinkedIn space, and a little bit of the kind of contracting or independent contracting space of, okay, what do you do, and can you make it so that somebody can find you if they need your services, versus you having to find them. So rather than looking through a want ad trying to find a job,
Exactly.
people are coming, rather than trying to push advertising and pay Facebook or Google or something to advertise for you. You create a presence, and then people start to find you, and somebody says, "Hey, I know you're interested in this. This other person's interested in this," and you kind of have these organic networks that are happening, and they're happening in lots of different spaces. I'm not a tech guy. I'm not on Facebook. I think I actually am on Facebook. I had to sign up for Facebook because I had to get access to a group I was in, but I'm never on actually my Facebook page. So I probably should check.
Yeah.
So that's probably more about the less about communication and more about just living in that space. I know in the engineering space, you have stuff like GitHub. People have their own accounts. People are creating their own websites. It's interesting because there was a thread. The threads on LinkedIn kind of they circle back, right? It's interesting. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
Like, you'll see something, and then like a month later, somebody else will be having the same conversation.
Exactly. Yeah.
So this conversation keeps coming up whether the cover letter's dead.
And
it gets a ton of traction, right?
Exactly.
Like there are a whole bunch of people who will be like, yes, it's dead, kill it, no more. And then there are a whole bunch of people who are saying, no, the cover letter is important.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to think about, you know, there's a traditional medium, right, of how do I illustrate and demonstrate. You'll recognize those words, right? Talking about
Yeah, definitely.
how do I illustrate and demonstrate skills by talking about what I've done, in a way that the person reading it feels confident. And in some ways, if you get online and you create a bit of a professional footprint, right?
Yeah.
Then what you're doing is you're illustrating and demonstrating those skills. So nobody, you know, somebody doesn't need a cover letter, somebody doesn't need a recommendation because they see what you're doing and they like it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that ends up being the avenue. Fortunately or unfortunately, the days of people getting a job coming out of school and staying in that job for 10, 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah, that's pretty much over.
Are the exception. Well, there'll be a few of them, right?
Yeah, I mean,
but
I feel like nowadays with access, we have access to all these, you know, LinkedIn, all these companies and different opportunities. It's easier to maybe staying in a job longer, I think, is more the exception rather than what everyone is doing, because you have access to all these opportunities. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think it's twofold. One, I think you have access to opportunities. I take that back. I think it's threefold. I think you have access to opportunities, so you can go out and find things, right?
Yeah.
But people can also find you. So if you do a good job and you talk about the work that you're doing, then people are likely to find you, and you may get people trying to pull you away from the job that you're doing.
Yeah.
Even though you weren't looking, even though your employer doesn't want you to leave, right?
Yeah.
You know, I think if you talk to most HR people, they'd rather hire someone that has a job than someone that doesn't.
Exactly.
Right? Because whenever someone doesn't have a job, we're not really sure why.
That's true.
And then the last piece of the puzzle is, I think what's happening in the workplace market is the jobs that people need to have done are changing so fast, right?
Yeah.
So it's not that companies don't want to have long-term employees, it's that companies' needs radically change. So the employees they had, and companies themselves radically change. So the employees that they had 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, if their company doesn't look like, if they don't look and operate the same way they did 5 years ago, then the employee they had 5 years ago doesn't necessarily make any sense anymore.
Right.
So it's just, I think what's happening is things are changing faster and people's careers are lasting longer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So things are changing faster. The change is happening within your career lifespan. Used to be change happened slowly, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you think of like manufacturing jobs, right? You start a manufacturing job in your 20s and 30, 40, 50 years ago, that manufacturing job was still there 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But try and think of a job today that 20 or 30 years ago, you're confident that job is still going to kind of look the same and be the same. and there are not a lot of them.
Definitely.
They're really shifting. Even something like teaching, right? We're now accelerated certainly by COVID. The entire platform of teaching has shifted.
Yeah.
And it's never going back.
I mean,
it's never going back to what it was.
Exactly. Now,
at 100%. It's like people going back, like companies are never going back to 100% of the people being there 100% of the time.
COVID like opened the door maybe to these opportunities of having just in class, having these recorded lectures and working from home are two examples. It opened the door to maybe to progress or to having the opportunity of teaching from home maybe or working from home. So
it's certainly shifted. I mean, I think about the so if you just take the little case study of the skill development work that I do with teaching and learning services, which happens in the context of a workshop. So it's like a 2-hour workshop, right? If we're at McGill, we have to find a classroom. We have to find a time when I can go. I have to commute to McGill, be in that physical space, go home. It's like, and there are all these restrictions on when it can happen because of the physical availability of the space. And if there are 25 people or 50 people coming to that workshop, you multiply all of that by 25 or 50 times. And the barrier to that event is really high.
Yeah.
So not very many of them happen. And when they do happen, they're not very well attended. Whereas now the barrier to that happening, just think about this conversation, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like if you and I, if we were both at McGill and you had wanted to set up a time for us to talk for an hour, we would have had to find a space. We would have had to find a space in our schedule. It would have been restricted by the fact that I'm not going to come down to McGill. Like, I like you and I like talking with you, but it takes me 45 minutes to get to McGill and 45 minutes to get home. So I'm not going to make a special trip to McGill so we can have this conversation. But now we can do it.
Yeah.
And now that we do it on video, we can post it and people can watch it whenever they want. We don't need an audience.
Exactly. I mean, as a VP events, I opted maybe doing more podcasts because I can post them and people can watch them whenever they want. Whereas sometimes doing Zoom events, for example, you might have less attendance and like people, maybe they don't want to show up on a Friday night, but the podcast, they can watch whenever they want. They can watch half of it. They can watch it in 3 months. So that's kind of one of the uses of this change to online. It kind of alleviates a bit the complication or the barriers to certain opportunities.
Yeah. The flip side of that is it creates a flood, right?
Yeah.
So we're in this kind of information flood where it's hard to you go into the podcast world and there are millions and millions and millions of things
Exactly.
hundreds spend time listening to. And it's hard to figure out which ones are worth listening to and which aren't. So that there is this challenge of sifting through information and trying to figure out where the good information is.
Yeah, I mean, definitely in class as a student, you get more flooded online as in person. If you compare both, online you feel like you're always getting new assignments or new information about certain midterms, exams. So you have to be able to sift through them and really control when you do what, basically.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know how we got here, but this is fun.
I mean, it's always fun to have the opportunity to adapt and maybe get better at things that you never thought you could or you would work on. I was talking to another prof in mechanical engineering, and he was saying, as a prof, it kind of pushed, people knew that they could do these videos and, the flipped classroom, but sometimes you just need the small push to, and COVID has been kind of a push to start going more online.
Sometimes you need a small little push, and sometimes you need a big giant kick in the derriere, right?
Okay, that's exactly it.
This has been a massive disruption.
Yeah,
it's
for
really
sure.
It's really hard to know. It's hard to know where it's going to go, but it is a there is a piece here that through all the noise, communication is always going to be a foundational skill. Because fundamentally, as human beings, our interaction is based on communication, and we're always going to be interacting with each other, whether it's whether it's two-dimensional through a video screen, or in person. So trying to think about that and get better at it is something that's never going to go out of style. There's some things that maybe will, but I don't think that's one. At least I hope not. I figure I'll probably work for another 20, 25 years. So I hope that for the next 20 or 25 years, communication will always be important.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it, it's more like it's not gonna necessarily help you if you're good at it, but if you're bad at it, it's gonna be a block in the road,
It's definitely a block in the road.
So you need to make sure that you have the base knowledge on how to maybe interact with people.
Yeah, there's no question that it's a giant block in the road.
So with COVID and everything being online, how would you say that the communication techniques or tips have changed compared to in person?
Some of the a lot of it is the same, right? Like human beings have been around for a long time. We're not going to change. Like the hardwiring of our brain's not going to change because of COVID.
Right.
But what's changed is how you go about creating that. So if we think about, so one of the things I think about in the presentation work that I do is the need to be dynamic, right?
Yeah.
So we all know monotone doesn't work, right? We've all had monotone professors. We've all had monotone lectures. Well, you guys have all read your smartphones. I've read, my Sports Illustrated when I was your age because I didn't have a smartphone.
Exactly.
But we've all done something else in class because the person presenting was monotone, and monotone is really monodynamic. So we need to create a dynamic feed. So in person, the dynamic feed is very much dependent on your physical body, your physical presence.
Yeah.
Like, do you sit in a chair behind a desk, or do you walk around and wander through the classroom and sometimes go sit in a chair with your students and look at the PowerPoint with them, or do you move? And can we see you, right? Do you react? Do you think about what you're saying? Do you are you in that moment? But then when we move online, there's this shift of, okay, now the person's this little small thing off to the corner, and you can't really see the person anymore. All you can see is their face, right?
Yeah.
And being dynamic with your face is not particularly dynamic. I mean, yeah, we can do a lot with facial expressions, but like, I have a goatee and a mustache. It's not going away, right? While we're talking.
Exactly.
So, and I'm not going to change my shirt. right? So there's a certain amount that's like, yeah, you are what you are there in that moment. Whereas when you walk around in a space, you really can change quite a bit. So one of the things that I've figured out with the presentation stuff is the visual projection now needs to be dynamic.
Yeah.
So in person, you actually don't want the PowerPoint to be particularly dynamic because you want people to pay attention to you, and every time the slide shifts, the attention shifts to the slide. So then people aren't paying attention to you. They came to see you, not to read your slides. If they wanted to read your slides, they could have done that without you. But when we're online, the slides need to be more dynamic because now the slide is the visual stimulus. And there's research that suggests, somewhere between 7 and 15 seconds, something needs to happen, move.
Oh yeah, wow.
So it's not, slides that you used to put there and talk about for 5 minutes. Yeah, you can't do that in a classroom when the classroom's online. But you can animate the slide. So now what you can do is you can have the slide shift. So now I've gotten into all this slide stuff with animation and morphing, where the slide slowly builds as you talk about it, instead of the slide all appearing, and shifts and moves, right? So with morphing, things can like change size and change focus and change. It's not very complicated. As I said earlier, I'm not a tech. My hope would be that people who have taken CCOM 206 and worked with me in the context of that class, at least some of you, would go away and consciously think about, okay, how do I make an effective argument to this person in this situation?
Yeah.
Not, oh, Andy told me to do this.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Because I can't tell you what to do. Human beings aren't good at being told what to do, especially high achieving human beings. But if I can get you to think about the right questions,
yeah,
or if I can just get you to ask questions, then you can start to be more strategic and more intentional. And if you can be more strategic and more intentional, I mean, we're talking about the gang of people at McGill and in the, whether it's CCOM 206 or grad students, or everybody's really smart. There's no problem. There's no lack of intelligence in the room, right? But there's sometimes a lack of thoughtfulness. There's sometimes a lack of strategic thoughtfulness. Like, what am I actually trying to do here? And who's my audience, and what do they care about, and what are they thinking about? And how do I achieve my goals within the context of their world? Because ultimately, when we present, if we want to have an impact on someone, we have to go into their world to do it, right? Like, it's all well and good to think, well, it's my CCOM 206 class, you're coming to me, but I don't really care about making an impact on how you act within my class. I want to make an impact on how you act when you leave my class.
Exactly.
So I have to somehow connect with your world outside of my class and think about the things that you care about. It's one of the reasons I love, sometimes McGill doesn't think very highly of the cover letter writing exercise. Because it's not academic work. Right. But I actually love the cover lettering exercise. it's my favorite exercise to do with students because it's real and you actually care about it. So we get in there and we unpack that communication medium, not because I want to, not because I work in HR, not because I work in the career placement office and I want you to get a job, although I'd like you to get jobs. But because I know if I go into a place that you care about, then we can have a conversation.
Yeah.
And you'll actually work at it versus just trying to do what I want and be done with it and move on.
I mean, for example, I've been doing a letter to apply for a scholarship, and that's a great example of what you're saying. Is one thing that I learned in your class, for example, is every sentence has a purpose, whereas sometimes you just write and you just go from one thing to another. But actually having a purpose to every sentence and knowing who you're talking to, maybe what they expect from an application, that was very useful to me, because they expect maybe someone who has leadership, so you try to incorporate that in your text.
Yeah.
So that's
just that concept of like in a high stakes short form, something like a cover letter or a scholarship application. Short, you're not writing a novel, right? It's 500 words, maybe 1,000 words. Just that concept of like, okay, every sentence, like I can actually go through and think about every sentence here and wonder what each sentence is doing and decide whether or not to keep it based on the answer.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually learning how to fish, right? Versus just me going out and catching some fish for you.
Exactly.
Right? That's actually learning how to do it. And you're smart enough to be able to figure that out now that you know to ask that question. And that's really when we get into that communication space of like, okay, what's the purpose here with this sentence and who am I talking to and is it likely to achieve that purpose? And then I go to the next one and there's a collection of them, and it's not just information. It's not, I always tell people that information, so informing is not a purpose. So a lot of times we think a text we're writing is to inform someone. It's never good enough. Informing is not a purpose. Our texts inform, yes, they contain information. They do inform. But why? What are we trying to do? And if you do that one thing, you'll be a better writer. Like just that, you'll be a better communicator, because suddenly you'll be writing with a purpose, and then it becomes really clear what you can get rid of. And 90% of good writing is getting rid of the 75% of the stuff that you thought, that you intuitively would say, and then you realize you don't need. So write whatever you need to write and then cut it in half. And the way you cut it in half is get rid of all the stuff you didn't need to say that still gets you to the same point. And people will start listening to you, because it doesn't take a long time to figure out. It doesn't take a long time to figure out what you want to say. And you've actually said something. You've been efficient. So there's a great quote, right? Like I was gonna write you a short letter, but I didn't have time, so a long one will have to do instead.
Nice.
It's that idea that there's this enormous inefficiency, because if you think about writing within the business world, how many people are going to read that? how many people do you hope are going to read it? So if it achieves its purpose, and usually it's some sort of multiple. Usually it's not 1 to 1. Usually it's 1 to 5, 1 to 10, 1 to 100. So if it's 1 to 10, it's worth spending some time to save those 10 people time reading it.
Yeah.
If it's 1 to 100, it's worth spending a lot of time. And if in the saving of time you suddenly are now clear, it's worth all the time you have, because when you were unclear, all kinds of people did the wrong thing, and they spent a whole bunch of time doing the wrong thing because your original message wasn't clear, because you didn't spend the time to make it clear. So it does take time to make something clear. But it's like the best investment you can make internally within a business situation, because of the time that it then saves. And you know, people don't value it the way they should, but the people who do it well end up being promoted and running and running and leading organizations because they do it well, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, as a student, maybe it's going to get you these internships, maybe just being more concise or more effective in your communication. One thing that I thought was really, made taking your class was viewing communication not just as something you do, but more as a strategic thing that's gonna yield results. Every time you write something, instead of saying, for example, oh, I'm a leader in my community, maybe show an example of that. It kind of relates to what you were saying about informing. What I found useful was like try to get the reader to come to the same conclusion as what you meant to write, but find another way of saying, for example, I'm a leader.
Right.
So that has to do with maybe being strategic when you communicate.
It's the classic summary sentence that ends up at the, so you get your body paragraph that talks about leadership, and then the last sentence in the paragraph says, as you can see from the above examples, I'm a really good leader. And it's like, get the paragraph to the point that you don't need that sentence anymore.
Exactly.
That's a great sentence because it gives you a strategic endpoint, and you'll know that you've gotten there when you can delete that sentence and be confident that the person reading it will come to that conclusion without you. We're really not good at being told things. It's really kind of against human nature. We want help figuring them out, but we don't want to just be told. Like, don't tell me what you can do. Tell me things that you've done in a way that I can decide what you can do.
Yeah.
Because then I'm confident in that decision, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Same thing with my presentation coaching. I do these like 2-hour workshops. Come listen to me for 2 hours. Without stopping, right? I'm like, I don't know how you all do this. And I wonder what the real impact of that is. And it's analogous to, like, I spent 2 hours talking about cover letters before you write one, and then half of you still do exactly the thing we talked about not doing. But there's another model with the communications coaching where people do these, instead of the 2-hour workshop model, they do a 4-hour model. where we do half an hour and then they do it and then I give them feedback, and then we do a half hour and then they do it and I give them feedback, and then they do a half hour and they do it and I give them feedback, and then they do a half hour and they do it and I give them feedback, and then they do a presentation. And that model, people really learn.
Yeah.
And it's this kind of in one ear and out the other, right? So there's a communication piece where when and this I think is the danger of the YouTube world, where we think we can just package things and deliver them, is they become in one ear out the other.
Yeah.
Because we haven't done anything with the information. And until we do something with it, we don't actually understand it.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't actually, so we think we understand it. We theoretically understand it. We could answer a quiz about it. So if I gave you a quiz about how to write a cover letter, you could answer the quiz the way I want you to.
Mm-hmm.
But when you actually write it, you can't write it the way I want you to until the second draft. Because it went in here and one ear out the other, like you didn't understand it. Because you didn't have to do anything with it. And that's the problem with these download space, like the YouTube is a download space, right? That's the problem with these, like, oh, okay, I'll just listen to someone. It's kind of like reading a textbook. We don't actually learn anything when we read a textbook.
Yeah, I think I saw a stat where it says when you read something, you only retain like 8 to 9% of what you read. So you have to read it like 12, 15 times to actually understand it, or even better, like actually doing problems or
you have to do the exercise.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And if you're really smart about reading those textbooks that have problems, this is a good tip for anyone. If you're not doing this already, you should. Just go to the problems. Don't read the textbook.
Yeah.
Start with the problems. And then go read what you need in order to solve the problem.
Yeah. For a student, what piece of advice would you give maybe a student that's in engineering right now, or for communication wise?
So the thing you were talking about earlier of trying to be intentional is awesome, right? So think about being intentional. And think about trying to I think at some point in your life, whether it's when you're in university or post-university, but it's probably a good idea to start it within university. Thinking about trying to have a thoughtful online professional presence somewhere.
Through LinkedIn is a good example, for example.
LinkedIn's a good example, but there are lots of others, right? Like you can do it. Just starting to think about having a little bit of a presence, because it takes time, right? And don't try and, like, if you go on LinkedIn, there's all this crazy stuff going around about trying to go viral with your LinkedIn, and you have to post every day, and you have to do this, and you have to do. Don't worry about any of that crap. Don't try and go viral. Just try and post something that's thoughtful, and start by just posting comments back to other people.
Yeah.
Start by thinking about the projects that you've done, and writing a little story about a project you've done, and posting it, right? Or putting it as an activity, right? Like you took a class or you did a job. You then, like, you have the McGill Engineering VP for events. Now one of your activities is this podcast. You write a little blurb about the podcast and the things that you did, with an eye towards, okay, what do we want to get? What are you trying to achieve? Well, we want to see you being strategic and thoughtful. So rather than, this story of like, who cares whether you did a podcast, like whether you decided to do a podcast versus Zoom events, completely irrelevant.
Exactly. Yeah.
Your decision to do a podcast because you thought it would have more reach and be more useful for your audience is gold.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you're right. It just matters that you tried. Like, I don't care if you make the wrong decision. I just want to see you being thoughtful and strategic. And that's the, so if you can think about doing things that are thoughtful, doing things that are strategic, doing things that involve critical thinking, doing things that involve thinking about other people and considering other people's needs, doing things that consider your audience's need or your client's need, then people are going to want to hire you.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's actually the skills people want. People don't care about your programming ability, except in a very small sliver of jobs. There's a very small sliver of jobs where your but even your programming ability is dependent on, like, are you programming strategically or are you just a robot programming because that's the way you know how?
Right.
Because it's the programming strategically person that we want to hire. So even if you're not as good at programming, if you're strategic about the way you program, I want to hire you. I can teach you to be a better programmer. But I can't teach you to be strategic if you're not strategic.
Exactly.
And I don't want to hire you if you're not strategic, because then you're just a lemon. I don't need them.
Yeah.
So I think thinking about thinking about that stuff, thinking about having a bit of an online presence, and then thinking a bit about the next 10 years of your life and realizing that the first 10, your first 2 or 3 jobs that you do are not going to be where you end up eventually, in all likelihood. Right. So don't be afraid to go sideways. Don't be afraid to zig and zag in the next 10 years of your life. Right. Think about the next 10 years of your life as just about collecting interesting experiences.
Yeah.
Like, go join a startup, and if you fail, who cares? You don't have a house yet to lose. If you fail, it doesn't matter. If the guy who put his house on the line for the startup fails, he's in trouble.
Right.
But if you're just joining the guy who put his house on the line, you don't have any real skin in the game except a couple years of your life and some labor. But you're going to learn so much from that experience that it doesn't matter that you didn't end up making a lot of money doing it. So just think about collecting experiences. Do stuff like what Philippe is doing here. Go do a podcast.
Right.
And just jump at, just do stuff.
So
do stuff.
Exactly. And you get to know what you like in the process. If you don't like things, for example, like for the podcast, of course, it's to give back to the community and like to create a service. But as we mentioned, like, it's also being strategic. It's my way of networking with people and getting to talk about things that I'm interested in, basically.
Yeah, and, I mean, your like our conversation today, is about creating a podcast and a library of interesting conversations. But it's also like you get to go have these interesting conversations with people. If someone else wants to come watch the conversation, that's cool.
Exactly.
Right? But you're the one who gets to have it. So be the person who gets to have it, right? Be the person who's out there doing stuff and having conversations. Go do a programming challenge on the week. Everybody's like, oh, I don't have time. I'm going to study for a midterm this weekend. just admit you're not going to study for the midterm anyway, and do the damn engineering competition.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be way more, you're going to learn way more doing the engineering competition this weekend than you are not studying for the midterm that you're going to wait until Tuesday night. Like the midterm's not till Wednesday. You're going to wait till Tuesday night anyway. Just admit it. Don't say you don't have time this weekend because you're going to study for the midterm.
Exactly.
Or get an A- on the midterm instead of an A.
It's not a great.
Because the difference between an A- and an A on the midterm, the engineering competition this weekend is going to do way more for your professional development and growth and knowledge development than the difference between an A and an A- or a B+ on Tuesday's midterm.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like I need a live audience. I wish I had people I was saying that to. They're going to be like, engineering competition, that happened a month ago, guy.
Exactly. Yeah, and to come back on LinkedIn, one thing that I like about that is it's kind of like a permanent CV and cover letter. You send your CV and your cover letter, and they basically check your profile, your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
So on the other, aside from the communication aspect of LinkedIn, you get to just being out there with your post on communication. You're just out there, and it's kind of like your CV. You don't have to rewrite in your cover letter per se. You have all these posts and videos where people can see what you've actually done. So I find
so
that's really
I have 3 places now where I have a little bit of a footprint. I have LinkedIn. I have a personal company blog, honecommunications.ca. Write that down. Come visit my blog.
How do you write it? How do you spell it?
Hone, H-O-N-E.
Hone
like sharpen.
Yeah.
honecommunications.ca.
Okay.
And then there's a YouTube channel with the same Hone Communications is the YouTube channel. And they all kind of cross-pollinate each other, right?
Yeah.
LinkedIn is the place that LinkedIn is the place right now where there's an audience. Like the YouTube video, I think one of them has 350 views. So it's not, it's not insignificant. 350 people watching it. But there are like posts on LinkedIn now that are crazy. There's like 2,000 views or 1,700 views. Like I was looking through it, I'm like, wow, there's 1,700 views of this post. And like someone will comment on something I wrote a month ago because they don't know I wrote it a month ago, right?
Exactly, yeah.
The way the LinkedIn algorithm works, that stuff keeps, as long as somebody comments on it, that stuff keeps
coming back,
resurfacing. So if someone comments on it and then I comment back to them, and I kind of look and see if they're an interesting, if there's someone that I think would be interesting to try and have part of the network that I'm trying to grow, I'll click on their profile and write them a little, connect with them and write them a little message. And then I'll have one more connection. So the connections are slowly growing. And it takes a little bit of work, but it never takes, if you don't try and do it. I had for a little while, I had fallen into this trap of, like, you got all these people who are talking about how to go viral and how to grow and they're like, yeah, you got to post every day. I did it every day for like 9 days. And then I'm like, okay, this is ridiculous.
Exactly.
Because I realized looking back at it, I'm like, and this comes back to what you were saying a minute ago, Philip, about being strategic about what you're saying and thoughtful. I wasn't being thoughtful anymore because I was having to post every day. So I'm like, okay, this may work for some people, but it doesn't work for me. For me, I post once a week, twice a week. That's kind of my new goal now. But when I do post something that I've been thoughtful about. Yeah. And so if somebody goes back and looks through it, they're like, oh yeah, this guy's interesting. This guy posts interesting stuff. And at some point that's going to be, at some point that'll be the network, right? Someone there is going to read it and be like, oh yeah, I want him to come talk at our company.
Yeah.
And then I'll do a 2-hour workshop at someone's company instead of at McGill.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that'll grow. So this has been fun, man.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have a time limit.
I mean, I like talking about this stuff, so yeah, it's been fun talking to you.
I know the normal the time limit for people listening to something is like 5 minutes or something. So we're like an hour and 13 minutes beyond when people will listen to us.
Yeah, I mean, I keep them around an hour, so. But then
it's still fun. But it's still fun.
Yeah, we can keep talking.
You can put a little disclaimer saying, start wherever, because it's all kind of random.
Yeah. Well, thanks for agreeing to this. It was a great time. It was fun talking to you. And have a great day.
Thank you.
And stay safe.
Good luck navigating the rest of your semester.